morning, everyone, and welcome to IATA's Global Media Day. Early morning question. Any idea how many years we've been doing this for? Any idea? We started in 2004, so this is the 15th edition of Global Media Day. Hands up anybody who's been here for all of them. Anyone? A few? Yeah, a few. Good. It's a terrible question. I admit I've been here for all 15 as well, and Brian. So just to say that it's an event that's important for us at IATA. It's firmly on the calendar. It's something that we really put a lot of effort into to try and ensure that we put together a good day. And I think this year you will find that the program we put together is quite interesting. But before that, what I'd like to do is to, I guess, recognize the journalists that have traveled, some short, some very long distances. I've heard some horror stories about the travel here. So hopefully we'll be able to entertain you well during the day. And that you'll be able to go home with some really interesting stories about the industry in IATA and sort of how we're looking towards the future. The program today has some very big blocks. The first part of the program, it'll be the Director General, the Director of Environment, and the Chief Economist, looking at the outlook and some of the big chunky events that we're anticipating in 2019. After morning coffee, we'll be focusing on lots of issues to do with infrastructure, which is another major area of focus for IATA. After lunch, we'll be looking at lots of topics related to digital transformation. It's a big buzzword in the industry right now, and we thought it would be good to group a few of the things that we're doing around that topic and present them out in the afternoon. And then we'll close the day by looking at more sort of operational and safety issues, unruly passengers, turbulence, and the traditional safety presentation, and that's how we'll conclude the day for today. A few, I guess, announcements about what's in the room. Logistics, if you need adapters, Switzerland has quite a unique system of electricity, so if you need an adapter, we've got a few at the back of the room. We've got some shared computers as well at the back of the room. They are shared computers, so please don't sort of lay claim to them for the entire day. Others may want to utilize them. Similarly, we've got a super attendance this year, which means we're really tight on space in the room. So if you have empty seats next to you, if you can make those free for other journalists that might want to sit, I think we've got a few people standing at the back, that would be much appreciated. If you have phones, if you could make sure that they don't make sounds, that would be great. Wi-Fi instructions are on the table. If you need some help, we've got some IT support as well available in the room. The presentations, as each presentation is being delivered, we will present you with a printed copy, including the speaker's notes. So hopefully that will help you in following the day along. At the end of the day, or actually as we progress through the day, those will also be all posted into the online media kit, so all of the documentation will be available online as well. I know some people have been active on social media already. The hashtag is #IATAMediaDay. If you do that, you'll join in the conversation. As I said, I saw some really interesting posts already, so that's fantastic. But the next thing I need to talk about is an embargo. What we'd like to do for this first session, and this first session only, is to embargo the entire session, so everything that's being said, between 9 and 10:30. Embargo that until 10:30. After that, absolutely free to report. The idea is to allow you to listen to the presentations that are being made without having to frantically tweet, communicate, post, file, whatever. So we'll try and take that sort of first 90 minutes as an embargo. At 10:30, everything's open for distribution. For ourselves, we're going to start the external distribution of the Outlook at 11:15. So that'll give those people present here an extra 45 minutes or an advantage of 45 minutes. That's about it. We're hoping to finish at about 16:15, so we'll try and keep on time throughout the day. And with that in mind, I'll introduce our panel here. On the far right, we have Michael Gill, who's the Director of Aviation Environment here at IATA, and also the Executive Director of the Air Transport Action Group. We have Brian Pierce, who's the Chief Economist of IATA, and we have Alexandre de Juniac, who is our Director General and Chief Executive Officer. So what I'll do is I'll ask Alexandre to take the podium and begin with a few remarks. After all three have presented, we'll open it up for questions. So, Alexandre.
Thank you, Tony. First of all, welcome. Welcome to Geneva, which is our second home city with Montreal, especially for those who have traveled far. I hope your journey and your air travel, your experience has been okay, even comfortable. We appreciate that you are such a big number and your interest in aviation. You will see today that you will deal with a lot of topics. The first one I would like to draw your attention on is to welcome you is our new visual identity. It has been a big project led by Tony and his team. And we are very excited to see what will be your feedback about this new look of IATA brand. I hope that you will agree that air transport is a key topic, an interesting topic, compelling story. Today we will transport 12 million travelers. We will also transport 180,000 tons of cargo. 3 million people will earn their keep by working in this industry. And a third of global trade by value will be transported by air. So representing something like $20 billion a day. We represent 1% of global GDP. The sum of the revenues of our airlines represent $900 billion. So it's 1% of global GDP of this world. And it will be similar in 2019. If we look at the various polls we are making, questioning people about our industry, and especially the business and leisure travelers, 80% recognize the cost of travel as value for money. And the cost of travel, it's not only a cost, it's something that has fallen by about 60% over the last 2 decades. So it's a declining cost in real terms. As you know, I call aviation the business of freedom. Why do I call that the business of freedom? Because aviation's activity liberates people to explore, develop, trade, learn, find business opportunities, and much more. Essentially, to live better lives. And if you have any doubt, look at the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. And you will see that aviation contributes to them all, starting with the top goal of eradicating poverty. If we share the view that 1 billion people have been lifted from poverty through globalization, our global world and globalization would not exist without aviation. We are contributing to that. We know that this globalization has been questioned recently. And it's a big concern. To be sure, we must aim for more inclusive globalization. But that will not be achieved with protectionist policies or closed borders. Borders have to be open to trade and to people. And that's a prerequisite for aviation to deliver its best to global economic and social development. So we are always in favor of open borders, open to trade and to people. We know that there are threats on this issue. There are threats on open borders. Brexit is one of them. Trade wars are other threats. What we know is that we will try to find solutions to accommodate these issues, Brexit, trade wars, and to try to avoid any bad consequences on our world and on aviation. I will take more questions on Brexit later. I have no crystal ball to be able to guess what is going to happen, as perhaps you have. We will be ready to share your views about that. But I will come back to specifically aviation topics. First of all, I will start with safety. It's our top priority. You know that it's in our DNA. It's my, it was and it's still my red light blinking in my head every morning. Safety. As you know, 2017 was an exceptional year. We had no fatalities in passenger jets. It's not the case, unfortunately, for 2018. We have had several accidents, and it rededicates all in aviation to flying even safer. Every accident rededicates all in aviation to flying even safer. Gilberto Lopez Meyer, where is Gilberto? He's in this room already. Gilberto there, at the back of the room. Will is our Senior Vice President for Safety and Flight Ops, will give you a detailed briefing on safety at the end of the day. We keep and present annual safety statistics, but improving safety is a continuous work. With the help of global standards, like the IATA Operational Safety Audit, we can be confident that flying will remain the safest form of long-distance travel. You must know that the airlines that are registered on our IOSA registry are much safer than those which are not. We will see that the same digital transformation that powered changes in all industries is set to deliver a boost to our already very safe performance. You will hear later today how we are helping the industry to share data to better manage in-flight turbulence. And this is only one example of the innovation that data will make possible. The MET program, we'll see that. Second topic, sustainability. Sustainability is critical for any industry's future, including aviation, particularly aviation. Effectively managing our climate change impact is our license to grow. Our focus is on coordinated action based on global standards. For example, we successfully asked government through ICAO to regulate us globally to manage our carbon footprint. And the solution, as you know, was the historic agreement on a carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation, CORSIA, which will effectively cap net emissions from 2020. And by 2050, we will cut our net emissions to half 2005 levels. Not to comment further, I will pause here and give the floor to Michael Gill, IATA's Director for Aviation Environment and Executive Director for the Air Transport Action Group, to provide some details on CORSIA and aviation's ambitious climate action. Michael, you have the floor.
Thank you, Alexandre. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As Alexandre said, climate change continues to dominate the industry's environmental agenda. Now, IATA is also continuing to focus on other topics around environmental best practice, and I would just ask you to bear that in mind. But clearly the focus on climate change is still very high on the political agenda, and as we speak here today, the UNFCCC Climate Change Conference continues in Katowice regarding the implementation of the famous Paris Agreement. The two areas I did want to cover in the area of climate change, however, relate to the implementation of CORSIA, as Alexandre mentioned, and our continuing work on sustainable aviation fuel. Now, as Alexandre said, CORSIA is an essential component of our broader climate change strategy to deliver our objective of carbon neutral growth from 2020. I'll speak in a moment about how CORSIA is progressing, but really just by way of introduction, I wanted to say a few words on why we believe CORSIA is the right measure. There's a lot of discussion, a lot of proposals within national governments at the moment around the adoption of so-called green taxes, but there are very significant advantages, in our view, to having CORSIA implemented on a global level. There are significant differences between CORSIA and a national green tax. So, for example, the targets under CORSIA are very clearly defined, adopted by the world's governments, agreed to by industry. In contrast with a tax, it's very difficult to set a defined target, very hard to measure any reductions that may or may not be achieved through its implementation. As for scope, CORSIA is clearly a global scheme, and we believe will therefore result in much more significant CO2 mitigation than any domestic policy for aviation could achieve. On the issue of transparency and traceability under CORSIA, we will know exactly where the money will go. Airlines will have to report to their national authorities regarding the projects they've invested in. A list of projects used under CORSIA will be published by ICAO. But in contrast, no one really knows where the money collected through a domestic tax actually ends up. And the knock-on impacts of the CORSIA scheme are also very different. We believe there will be significant social, environmental, and economic benefits related to sustainable development coming from the projects that are invested in under CORSIA. In contrast with a domestic tax, there is a negative impact on local economies through reduction in trade and tourism, and passengers also negatively impacted as air transport becomes more expensive. So we firmly believe CORSIA, adopted on a global level, is the solution. Where are we with CORSIA? The scheme was adopted, the framework for the scheme was adopted at the 2016 ICAO Assembly, just over 2 years ago. Since then, ICAO has been progressing the work on the adoption of the technical standards. We're firmly into that implementation phase of CORSIA. We reached a significant milestone in June of this year when the ICAO Council adopted the detailed technical standards on the monitoring, reporting and verification of aircraft emissions. Those rules will come into full effect in all ICAO member states from the 1st of January 2019, so just around the corner. And from that date, all aircraft operators who have international operations will need to begin monitoring and reporting their emissions in accordance with the ICAO rulebook. As many of you will recall, CORSIA in its initial phases will apply on a voluntary basis before becoming mandatory for all states, with a few exceptions, mandatory for all states from 2027 onwards. As of today, we have 76 states who have volunteered for CORSIA. Just 4 states just in the last few months have indicated their intention to volunteer for CORSIA in its initial phases, including Guyana, Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, the Dominican Republic. And I think we really need to recognize and congratulate those states who have taken this bold step, this bold climate and aviation leadership step in supporting the CORSIA scheme. One final word on CORSIA, and I really wanted to highlight this. The success of this scheme, the success of any CO2 reduction measure, really needs to be done on the basis of the CO2 mitigation which you achieve, not on the basis of the compliance costs for operators. CORSIA, as a global scheme, we believe will result in far greater CO2 mitigation than any combination of national or regional measures could achieve. As I said, we have 76 volunteer states as of today. We hope that number will increase over time, and of course the scheme will become mandatory from 2027 onwards. And we believe that over its lifetime, just compared with the regional EU ETS measure which we have in this part of the world, we believe that CORSIA will achieve 3 times more CO2 reductions than the regional ETS. Now, CORSIA itself includes a revision clause every 3 years, and we believe that as that revision clause is looked at, as the revision is looked at by ICAO, the ambition will ramp up over time, and we could see even more significant CO2 mitigation achieved. That's for CORSIA. I wanted to mention briefly what we're doing in the area of sustainable aviation fuel. As you'll all be aware, this is a fundamental pillar of the industry's climate action plan. The use of sustainable aviation fuel can reduce CO2 emissions over their life cycle by anything up to 80%. Where are we today? We have 5 certified approved pathways for the production of these fuels, and that amounts to something like 6 billion litres of fuel agreed to purchase through forward purchase agreements by the airlines, and we're well over 150,000 flights which have been carried out using some blend of sustainable aviation fuel. The major barrier to commercial deployment remains policy. Most policies adopted by national, regional governments favour the ground transport sector, and we need to see a fundamental change in the policy approach to be adopted by governments and by regulators in order to increase deployment, to increase demand. Just to conclude, we should note, however, a number of airlines who have taken a very strong lead in this area. They're driving ahead with important investments and long-term commitments to sustainable aviation fuel. They're noted here on this slide. We really believe sustainable aviation fuel is going to be the deciding factor as we continue to build our sustainable growth. ICAO's analysis, and let me conclude on this, shows that 2% of all aviation fuel could come from sustainable sources by 2025. The available feedstock is there, it's just a question of harnessing it, and that would amount to, 2% would amount to around 7 billion litres. We really believe that at that level there would be a tipping point where the flow of sustainable aviation fuel can begin to sustain itself economically. So we continue to urge governments, continue to urge airlines to further ambition in this area. Thank you.
So thank you, Michael. Another topic is infrastructure. You will hear a lot about infrastructure today, and that's for a good reason. Airlines cannot connect the world without appropriate infrastructure, airports and air traffic management. And we are approaching an infrastructure crisis. And in some location, we are already there. You know what we need, what airlines need. We need sufficient capacity. We need efficiency, so alignments with airline technical and service level needs. And we need affordability. But getting these 3 elements right is a difficult long-term challenge, because decisions must be made today if we want infrastructure to be in place a decade from now. And our projections that you know are for 8.2 billion, 8 journeys in 2037, so a doubling compared to today, 4 billion more than today. And planning by most governments is not ambitious enough to meet that demand, as far as we see these days. On air traffic management, you know that 2018 has been a terrible year for Europe, and European summer was an air traffic management mess of epic proportions. Delay minutes ballooned to 14 million minutes by end October. It's up 53% on 2017. 14 million minutes, what does it mean? It's 26 years. So it's completely unacceptable. Issues with air traffic management are not confined to Europe. We have congestion in the Gulf that threatens the efficient functioning of the superconnectors. We have delays in China that are rampant as demand growth outpaces the system's capacity growth. And we see similar problems all over the world. What do we tell governments? The first message is that we must do better. The technical capabilities for smooth air traffic management exist. The problem is finding the political will to implement it. That can be because solutions need cross-border cooperation, because of vested interest in the controller communities, or because collaboration is needed with military users of airspace. As governments work to overcome these blockers, we have encouraged European states to build strategic national airspace plans. So far, France, Spain, Bulgaria, Italy, and Poland have signed agreements to develop these strategies in cooperation with IATA, and Poland is the first to deliver. Since industrial requirements are consistent from state to state, the result of these individual strategies should present a harmonized result, one that pushes toward the elusive goal of the single European sky. Airports now. We know that airports is also a critical infrastructure and that we desperately need more capacity in various regions of the world. And travelers see more directly the problems with airports. We recently polled travelers and found that 70% of them sense the overcrowding of airports, and over half would support plans to expand their community's airport. Still, we face bottlenecks around the world that include Mexico City, where the new Mexican government is backtracking on constructing the critically needed hub airport. It's really a shame to waste the investment already made, and it is a long-term mistake to forego the economic benefits that a major hub would generate. Stopping a project under construction is an extreme case, I have to admit, but the problem of airport bottlenecks is with us in all parts of the world: Sao Paulo, New York, Frankfurt, London, Lagos, Addis Ababa, Bangkok, Sydney, to name just a few. We know that solving the airport capacity problem is complex from various points of view. But first, digital transformation based on global standards has tremendous potential to improve how we use our airport infrastructure. Our next initiative with Airport Concil International aims to do just that. Anne Carnell, she's there? Anne? Oh, I don't see her. I hope we'll brief you on this later.
Join us this afternoon.
Okay, good. You will also have a chance to speak to Andrew Price about our RFID program. Is there Andrew in the room as well? He will join us as well. And Guido Petermans. Guido is there? I don't see him. Oh, they will be there, don't worry. He will present on our One ID, an innovative program that enables passengers to get from curb to gate using biometrics. Second, we have a process for allocating scarce slots that need optimization. A key element is getting airports to transparently declare their capacity, something which does not happen consistently today. And we must reject calls for slot auctioning. Auctioning would enrich the airports, raise the cost of travel, provide no incentive to grow capacity, and limit competition by entrenching incumbent carriers in the airports they serve. The only long-term solution for airport capacity is to build more when it is needed. Lara Morgan, she's there. Lara, she's at our desk, probably close to mine, will brief on why global implementation of the worldwide slot guidelines is the priority until that happens. And lastly, airlines have many bitter disappointments with airport privatization. Our June AGM unanimously passed a resolution urging government to be cautious. Herman Misty is there. He is there. We'll update you on how we are working with governments to help airport privatizations to deliver on expectations by establishing best practices for concession contracts. Contracts that fairly balance the interests of airports, investors, airline communities, and most importantly, consumers. Another critical resource that is in scarce supply is qualified people. But let's talk about talent. We will need a huge number of skilled workers, both for replacing retirements and to accommodate the rising demand for air travel. We saw the real impact of this when Emirates needed to trim its schedule owing to a shortage of pilots earlier this year. The good news is that airlines are hiring. We see a 2.2% growth of the workforce in 2019 to 2.9 million employees. And that is on top of 3.1% and 3.3% growth in 2018 and 2017 respectively. The level of participation of women in aviation is in sharp focus as well. The overall aviation workforce is probably roughly balanced, but that's not true at the senior level. The IATA Board of Governors is proof. Of the 32 members, 2 only are women. And that ratio will not dramatically change because the population of women CEOs is very limited. To help understand the blockers, we are partnering with Korn Ferry and other industry organizations in a major study. It will identify best practices from successes in recruiting, retaining, and promoting women in aviation. And we look forward to reporting the results of this work in the first half of 2019. Now let's turn our attention towards the bottom line. While delivering the societal benefits of connectivity, it is essential that airlines are able to turn a profit, pay employees, reward investors, and you know that for much of aviation's history, that has been very hard to achieve. In the recovery from the global financial crisis, that changed. Airlines have been in the black since 2010, and since 2015 we have been generating returns in excess of our cost of capital. That's a fancy way of saying that airlines are finally making normal profit. We are working in a normal business environment. I don't have a crystal ball to see what the future will bring. But what we do is that we have our chief economist, Brian Pierce, who will give us some insight on the financial health for air transport in 2019. Brian, you have the floor for the expected forecast.